En rembobinant la carrière cinématographique de Charlton Heston, Ben-Hur et son char lancé à pleine vitesse jaillissent sur l'écran. Ce géant de près de 2 mètres, éternel héros aux pectoraux rebondis, a incarné pendant près de 60 ans les plus grands de ce monde. Des présidents, des généraux, des génies.
Charlton Heston always played a kind of a stoic, larger-than-life idealist.
Pourtant, la jeune génération n'a retenu de Charlton que l'image d'un vieillard réactionnaire à la mâchoire carrée, oubliant ses premiers combats auprès de Martin Luther King et Kennedy.
He was very much a Democrat, very liberal, and then he gradually moved more and more to the right.
Un nouveau rôle qui n'est plus du cinéma. Tel Moïse, le personnage qui l'a fait star, Heston s'est mué en messie de l'Amérique conservatrice.
From my cold, dead hands. Hubris had taken over in Heston's mind. He saw himself as a great man.
L'histoire de Charlton Heston est celle d'un acteur enivré par ses rôles. À force de jouer les héros, il a tenté d'en devenir un. En 1946, au lendemain de la Seconde Guerre mondiale, le jeune Charlton Heston débarque à New York. À 23 ans, le petit gars du Michigan veut tenter sa chance au théâtre et conquérir Broadway. À son grand désespoir, il enchaîne les auditions, sans succès.
Charlton Heston was always in love with the theater, and I think he thought of himself as a person of the theater. That was what he was interested in after high school and in college. But I guess to survive, he ended up doing live television in New York City.
Pour le jeune comédien fauché, la télévision balbutiante est la seule issue s'il veut s'adonner à sa passion, jouer. D'autant qu'à l'époque, le petit écran ne peut s'offrir de stars.
People in movies couldn't do television because they were all under contract and the studios wouldn't let them. So here was this vast new medium, and the only people that could get to work in it was a whole bunch of kids in their mid-20s whose common job description was that they were out of work.
Les plateaux télé sont une découverte pour Charlton, ou plutôt Chuck, comme il se fait appeler. Il doit apprendre à jouer face à la caméra, qu'il apprivoise aussitôt. Cette télévision en germe est son premier tremplin.
He was actually discovered appearing on television by Casablanca producer Hal Wallace, brought to Hollywood, and began his career.
Arrivé à Los Angeles, l'acteur ne parvient pas à faire décoller sa carrière. À 27 ans, Charlton Heston baisse les bras. Il s'apprête à quitter Hollywood. Mais une rencontre va changer son destin. Sur le parking des studios de la Paramount, le jeune Charlton croise la route d'un des géants du cinéma, le réalisateur Cecil B. 2000.
I thought, well, I have met him. I should at least wave. So I waved in what I felt was a companionable way. And as was later reported to me, he turned to his secretary and he said, "Who's that?" And his secretary flipped back and she said, "That's Charlton Heston. He's a New York stage actor. He's acted in 3 plays in New York. He was signed by Hal Wallace last March. He's done 1 picture called Dark City. You ran it 2 weeks ago. You didn't like it." And he said, yes, but I like the way he waved. And he said, we better have him in about the circus picture. Have him come in.
Cecil B. 2000, l'un des fondateurs de la Paramount, prépare un nouveau film, le plus grand chapiteau du monde. Il cherche activement l'acteur qui incarnera le premier rôle, le directeur du cirque, un gaillard athlétique imposant le respect. Connu pour son flair hors pair, il n'a fallu que quelques instants au réalisateur pour repérer Heston et son physique de dieu grec, doublé d'un charisme unique.
DeMille saw him and saw the stature, saw that grandness that came out as stiffness.
He was 6'3", 6'4", strapping, always handsome, always penetrating eyes, that jaw.
He had so many masculine factors in him. One was tremendous gravitas, which is a great solidity.
En pariant sur ce débutant, au regard bleu perçant, Cecil B. 2000 est certain de ne pas se tromper. Pour lui, Charlton Heston va crever l'écran.
So Heston stays in Hollywood and makes this film, which became the Oscar-winning best film of that year.
On behalf of the thousands that it took to make the greatest show on earth, I thank you for them.
Cet Oscar plonge Charlton dans le grand bain de Hollywood. En un film, Heston est devenu un nom. Mais son mentor va bientôt lui offrir le rôle de sa vie et lui permettre d'entrer au panthéon des étoiles du cinéma. Quatre ans plus tard, le réalisateur âgé de 70 ans, Cecil B. 2000, caresse un dernier projet fou. Réadapter son propre film de 1923, Les 10 commandements. Pour raconter l'épopée de Moïse, Heston a le bon profil.
Here is a photograph of the original statue in Rome. Notice the likeness to Charlton Heston, who plays Moses in the Ten Commandments.
The mythical story is that he saw a sculpture by Michelangelo that resembled Charlton Heston. But none of that is really true. After going through his list of people, he decided to audition Heston.
He would just talk about the part, and there were never any progress reports about how you were moving up in the running or anything. He would just go through the same thing, and each time you'd say, gee, that certainly sounds like a marvelous role. And at least I never thought of anything cleverer than that to say. And finally, I was informed that I had the part.
When Heston put the costumes on, the robes, the staff, the beard, he became Moses.
Behold his mighty hand! Paramount Pictures proudly presents Cecil B. DeMille's The Ten Commandments.
Un projet colossal. Des effets spéciaux qui révolutionnent le cinéma, du jamais vu. Face à cette démesure en Technicolor, avec des millions de dollars de décors et de costumes, le talent de Chuck prend toute sa dimension.
Let my people go. Come to me no more, Moses. You will surely die. So let it be written.
The Ten Commandments, of course, is a gigantic super production with a huge cast, a cast of thousands. But there's no doubt when you see the Ten Commandments, who's playing Moses? It's Charlton Heston. And you might say, in a weird way, he kind of steals the show.
Chuck passe des heures à mémoriser des passages de l'Ancien Testament et propose même à Cecil B. 2000 de jouer pieds nus pour rendre sa performance plus crédible.
There's a funny story about that, where he liked to stay in costume 24 hours a day. I guess he didn't want to lose that character, and he grew into the character.
Who shall withstand the power of God?
Pour Heston, c'est une révélation. Il se complaît dans ce rôle de prophète superstar. Un film métaphorique pour les Américains qui voient dans la recherche de liberté des Hébreux leur propre conquête de la terre promise.
The Ten Commandments.
World premiere of The Ten Commandments. From the cast of Paramount's VistaVision presentation, a $13 million classic which will be seen on theater screens for years to come.
Pour Charlton, le film est un triomphe. Sa stature, sa voix rauque et entêtante séduisent les spectateurs et suscitent la passion des spectatrices.
The Ten Commandments gave him a path to stardom. It made him, it established him. There were no more money worries. He was on the way.
Charlton n'est plus seulement un acteur, c'est une vedette. La Californie lui tend les bras. Sur les hauteurs de Hollywood, il dessine avec sa femme Lydia les contours de leur nouvelle vie et de leur villa de rêve.
It's really at the top of Mulholland Drive, and it overlooks, it juts out. It's like carved into rock. If you look all the way to Santa Monica, you can see all the way to the beach. And the home is a ranch-style, rambling ranch-style, one floor. But right out, as you come out into the courtyard, a pool, a big pool, where he swam, and then on the other side of the house, there was a tennis court.
Une villa de star, mais à son image. Perdue dans les collines, loin des paillettes et de la frénésie de Beverly Hills, où vit le tout Hollywood. Pour ses rôles aussi, il aspire désormais à un cinéma d'auteur, loin des superproductions.
He was willing to try new and different things. We stereotype Charlton Heston as the star of epic films, but he did other kinds of movies.
En 1957, parmi les dizaines de scénarios que Charlton Heston reçoit chaque jour, l'un d'eux attire son attention. La soif du mal, car Orson Welles est envisagé pour jouer dans le film. Aux yeux d'Heston, Welles est avant tout un cinéaste de génie, injustement blacklisté par Hollywood en raison de positions politiques jugées trop à gauche.
The script was offered to me by Universal to star in. It was a fairly routine police story. So more than in most films, the director was crucial, and I made this point to Universal. And I said, who's going to direct it? And they said, well, we haven't chosen a director yet, but Orson Welles is going to play the heavy. And I said, why don't you have him direct it? He's a pretty good director. And they responded to that with amazement, as though I had suggested that my mother direct the film.
Comme de nombreux artistes, Orson Welles a été banni de l'usine à rêves, victime des purges anticommunistes qui ont dévasté Hollywood dès les années 40. Heston met tout son poids dans la balance. Il ne jouera dans La soif du mal que si Orson Welles le réalise.
Only the offbeat, original, creative powers of Orson Welles could bring you so suspenseful, so gripping, so different a drama.
You framed that boy. Framed him!
I don't think I'm very good in it. I'm proud that I was therefore responsible for Orson Welles directing the first film he had directed in Hollywood in 10 years and the last one he directed in Hollywood.
Aujourd'hui film culte, La soif du mal est un échec commercial. Mais il campe Heston dans le rôle de l'homme intègre et courageux, à la ville comme à l'écran.
What did you do with her? Where is my wife? My wife!
It showed a moral integrity on the part of Heston that he was willing to stand up at that very frightening time for a man like Orson Welles or for others who had been, as we say, blacklisted. In doing that, he was really threatening his own future in Hollywood. And so that was, you know, took a lot of guts on his part.
Son statut de star lui permet d'imposer ses vues au studio, dont le pouvoir tyrannique décline. L'âge d'or d'Hollywood n'est plus. Les majors ont de gros soucis financiers. Elles peinent à remplir les salles obscures, concurrencées par la télévision.
All of them were failing. And in the next decade, they would all sell out to corporations, and everything would change in Hollywood. MGM was one of the biggest failing studios.
Pour redresser la barre au plus vite, la MGM décide en 1958 de s'inspirer des 10 commandements, en appliquant la même recette. Un film à grand spectacle, avec un héros magnétique.
The story of Judah Ben-Hur, the prince who became a slave and dared the evil might of the conqueror.
Pour l'incarner, pas d'hésitation. Charlton Heston.
I tell you, the day Rome falls, there will be a shout of freedom such as the world has never heard before.
Comme Moïse avant lui, Ben-Hur libère son peuple opprimé dans cette saga biblique, sur fond de rivalité fratricide.
You kill me and your mother and sister will die today.
Ben-Hur est un super-héros avant l'heure. Et Charlton Heston, le nouvel emblème du rêve américain.
Charlton Heston, Ben-Hur.
Le film sauve la MGM et permet à Heston d'obtenir l'Oscar du meilleur acteur à 36 ans.
It's really true. When you stand here, you want to thank everybody you ever knew in this business. I would like especially to thank not only all of you and all of them, but Willie and Christopher Fry.
Dans ce discours spontané, Charlton affirme une fois encore ses positions et enfreint les codes en vigueur à Hollywood. Il remercie délibérément Christopher Fry, un auteur qui a contribué au film, mais qui n'est pas le scénariste officiel de Ben-Hur.
Inside the industry, people took note that he did something that you're not supposed to do. Heston had a very moral view about who deserved credit for what they did. You know, he never really was Hollywood. Home life, that's where the action was. Traveling, whenever he went on the road, and he was always on the road, very few of his films were shot in Hollywood. The whole family would go.
Sur chaque tournage, Heston a besoin de ses proches près de lui, surtout de sa femme, Lydia, qu'il a connue à l'université et qui a renoncé à sa carrière de comédienne pour lui.
Lydia was much more famous than Chuck when they first met. She was the well-known actress. So she did give up her career for him because they were very, very devoted to each other. She wanted to be with Chuck, so she would go with him rather than doing a play of her own in the theatre here in New York.
Charlton est une star qui fuit les spotlights. Réservé, droit dans ses bottes, il s'est construit un monde feutré, autour d'amis fidèles et de sa femme Lydia, avec qui il restera marié 64 ans.
I don't go out a lot socially. There are certain public functions you have to go to, but the large affair is not one I'm drawn to. I still tend to wander off in the library, if they have a library, and look at the books.
He was somebody who didn't need the Hollywood scene. He would go into the study for hours at a time, read, write in his diary, look out the window, and just think, contemplate.
Heston le contemplatif porte aussi un regard acéré sur le monde qui l'entoure. Son grand sens de la justice le conduit à s'intéresser à des questions loin de son quotidien. Dès 1961, à la demande d'un ami afro-américain, il est devenu l'un des premiers blancs célèbres à s'engager dans le mouvement des droits civiques. Un engagement méconnu qui va se poursuivre plusieurs années.
We are requesting all citizens to move into Washington, to go by plane, by car, bus, any way that you can get there. Walk if necessary. We are pushing for jobs, housing, desegregated schools. This is an urgent request. Please join. Go to Washington.
En 1963, Martin Luther King prépare une grande marche en faveur des droits civiques. Elle aura lieu à Washington. Et pour médiatiser cette action historique, il charge son ami, l'acteur afro-américain Harry Belafonte, de contacter les rares stars de Hollywood prêtes à marcher à ses côtés. Parmi elles, Burt Lancaster, Marlon Brando et Charlton Heston.
Belafonte said, I needed somebody for the Midwest, and I had interviewed him a number of years ago. He said, who better than Charlton Heston, Moses, who could speak to them? So I called Heston up, and I first asked him, would you co-chair this with Brando in Lancaster? And he said, no. And then he told me, well, I kind of had a sense of his ego. And so I said, how about if you chair it, and they will work with you as the co-chairs under you? And Heston decided, yes, I will lead this. I will be the Moses of, the Hollywood civil rights movement.
Flatté, Charlton Heston prend son rôle à cœur et joue de son influence pour rallier d'autres acteurs à la cause de Martin Luther King. Il va jusqu'à les recevoir chez lui pour les convaincre.
Listen, if everybody has coffee, let's get started. The first thing to get settled is this statement for the press. We will march in Washington on August 28, 1963, along with hundreds of thousands of our fellow Americans who believe in equal opportunity and freedom for us all. We've formed a committee to encourage others to march with us, composed of Marlon Brando, Peter Brown, Tony Curtis, Charlton Heston, Burt Lancaster.
I somehow feel that some people may misinterpret this as a means for some actors or for some people to want to get publicity.
You know, everything an actor does, he does in the public eye. If you have a public identity, you can't abdicate it, but we're not, I think the main point is we're not doing it as public individuals. We're expressing the citizens' rights to peaceable assembly. It's in the Constitution.
We all live black and white. Yes. Trying to fight for equal rights. Yes. Keep your eyes on the...
Ce 28 août 1963, 300 000 personnes défilent en faveur des droits civiques. Parmi elles, une délégation d'acteurs de Hollywood emmenée par Charlton Heston.
Charlton Heston does seem to have been a person who wanted to be a leader, who took a leading role, who felt a kind of moral obligation to be a leader.
Chuck écoute avec passion le rêve de Martin Luther King. Pour lui, c'est l'expression de ce que doit être l'Amérique. Une terre d'égalité pour tous. Un message politique encore très controversé.
I think he was, at that time, a man of considerable courage, because it was not only that fear of some actors being identified too closely with the civil rights movement and therefore losing movie roles, but also because even the Kennedy administration was nervous about the march itself, fearful that it would possibly turn into a riot. For Heston to have showed up there, knowing that he was in this very dramatic and somewhat perilous situation, you had to give him credit for that.
Ses prises de position politiques renforcent sa stature d'homme juste et droit.
Among our people, we have a word for a warrior with a vision to be just and the courage to be merciful. We call such a man El Cid.
Le Cid, Michel-Ange, le Major Dundee ou le président Jackson. À Hollywood, Heston renvoie l'image d'un homme valeureux, l'acteur idéal pour incarner des héros plus grands que nature.
Charlton Heston's movies are mostly big action films. You see him, he's mostly out there on a horse, in the desert, in the middle of a war. He plays these gigantic authority figures in films all the time who are meant to be quite forceful personalities.
Sa puissance et sa virilité sont devenus sa marque de fabrique. Dans les 30 films qu'il a déjà tournés en 15 ans, son physique d'Apollon, ultra sexy, est surexploité par les réalisateurs.
That was his money card. That's what the body was. The reason you see him half naked in so many films, because he had a nice body. Male stars, if they're handsome and they're built right, you'll see their body. Even if it makes no sense in the movie, you'll see it.
He knew, I think, from a very young man, that part of his success was his looks. I know he swam every single morning of the year, summer and winter, in his pool, and he used to go to the gym quite a lot.
Well, he was an athlete. Every day of his life, until the end, he played tennis.
Pour Heston, son corps n'est pas seulement un artifice. C'est son instrument de travail pour jouer des rôles historiques, souvent exigeants physiquement.
Very early in my career, I started playing specific biographical figures. Then it shortly became almost a matter of course that I would be offered those parts when they came along, and some of them were very good parts indeed. And I found it a very rewarding experience to play them. I think it would be fair to say that most of my favorite parts, most of the parts that I consider the most difficult and challenging, are specific historical individuals.
Des figures tutélaires qui ne sont pas seulement des rôles de composition. L'acteur au sommet de sa carrière possède une aura qui dépasse les frontières du cinéma et séduit le monde politique.
September and October and the first week of November, the candidates carry their message to the people.
En 1960, le démocrate John Kennedy se lance à l'assaut de la Maison-Blanche. Stephen Schlesinger, dont le père Arthur était conseiller spécial du candidat Kennedy, se souvient de cette campagne très médiatisée.
In 1960, I was at the Democratic Convention, which nominated John Kennedy as the Democratic candidate. And while I was there, my father took me to an event where Charlton Heston was present. And I found him to be a very genial, friendly figure. He's a big man. He, had a certain charisma to him. He was a very strong liberal in 1960.
Une fois Kennedy à la Maison-Blanche, le Parti démocrate cherche d'autres figures de proue. Pour eux, Heston, icône de l'Amérique conquérante, est un ticket gagnant pour une élection.
The Democratic Party of California approached him to run for the Senate against another former actor named George Murphy, who was then a Republican senator.
Democrats get that Heston has this image that could, quote, reach across the aisles. Somebody who the Democrats thought could appeal to swing voters.
But Heston turned them down.
Pas question de mettre fin à sa carrière au sommet pour la politique. Mais Heston a pris goût au militantisme et accepte de se rendre au Vietnam pour soutenir les GIs. Un voyage qui va ébranler les convictions libérales du comédien.
In 1966, he's asked to go to Vietnam. He wasn't an active anti-war spokesperson. He wasn't an active pro-war. His guts told him, why are we there? There's something wrong with being there.
Certains artistes à cette époque se rendent au Vietnam pour divertir les soldats. Mais Heston s'enfonce dans la jungle pour réconforter les troupes qui souffrent.
When he went to Vietnam and he saw these soldiers and came back and saw the reaction to the war, the burgeoning student movement, the anti-war faction, he was shocked.
Because he believes it's American patriotism. We need to support our troops.
Heston est sidéré de voir de jeunes soldats se sacrifier pour l'Amérique sans le soutien des leurs. Il en veut aux démocrates de ne pas s'opposer à ces manifestations.
The violence, the riots, the anti-war movement, all very much disturbed him to the point where he started changing his political views. For every liberal view he used to have, he now turned that into a conservative view of that same thing.
Pour Heston, cette guerre est un déclic. Les États-Unis sont en déliquescence. Les démocrates sont devenus trop libéraux. Cet homme passionné, sans demi-mesure, se veut le nouveau shérif du pays. Du jour au lendemain, il quitte les démocrates pour le Parti républicain, seul capable à ses yeux de défendre le patriotisme américain.
I think of myself as a populist, even when I was supporting for public office significant Democrats. I still didn't belong to the party. And when I switched and began supporting Republicans, it wasn't I that changed, but in my view, the Democratic Party that had changed.
Ce revirement politique brutal dévoile une personnalité complexe et paradoxale. Charlton Heston est un nouvel homme, moins lisse qu'il n'y paraissait. Ce nouveau Charlton va aussi changer d'image aux yeux du public. Car au même moment, au début des années 70, sa carrière est à un tournant. Fini les films épiques. Hollywood vit de profondes mutations.
Producers become more independent, break away from the system. And Heston was considered by all these new directors, these new young directors, as the past. He's historic. He's old Hollywood.
By the time you reach the late 60s and 1970s, he's starting to get a little bit older, and there's a whole new generation, the kind of Dustin Hoffman, Al Pacino generation that has come along, and they're going to be picking up the Oscars in that era.
À près de 50 ans, pour monter dans le wagon de la modernité, Chuck doit se réinventer.
Can't help thinking that somewhere in the universe there has to be something better than man. Has to be.
En 68, il s'essaye avec audace à la science-fiction. Avec La planète des singes, il casse son image de surhomme afin de prouver qu'il n'est pas un acteur sur la touche.
The world he finds out in the galaxy will challenge every idea you've ever had of civilization.
You did it. You cut up his brain, you bloody baboon!
Heston came across this script, and he was intrigued by that. He liked the idea of playing this cocky rocket pilot who crashes on this strange planet where the apes are humans and humans are...
Planet of the Apes, when I saw that, which was a movie that I loved, absolutely loved, and was all centered around the personal revelation that he has. He's so unwavering in his conviction, and at the end, his whole world turns upside down.
Capturé par des singes évolués, le héros, Taylor, se retrouve réduit en esclavage, tel un animal primitif.
Julius!
Natural-born thieves, aren't they?
La planète des singes est un miroir de la société américaine et du malaise qu'elle traverse.
Get me a collar and leash.
Face aux inégalités raciales, face aux dangers nucléaires de la guerre froide, Heston interprète un anti-héros qui tente une fois de plus de montrer le chemin dans l'adversité.
There were sort of two metaphors, actually, for Charlton Heston. One was a metaphor for faith, which could be found in the Ten Commandments in Ben-Hur. You know, this idea that no matter what happens, God will be on our side and help us. But the other metaphor was the one found in Planet of the Apes, and that was in a world in which nothing made sense. Yes, there was wrongdoing, there was injustice, but it was up to human beings to fight that. God may or may not be there to help us. And that confusion and that worry and that doubt that we felt as kids was something that Heston expressed powerfully on the screen.
Le film fait un carton au box-office. Une nouvelle génération tombe sous le charme de Charlton. Puis les succès du Survivant, où il réchappe d'une guerre bactériologique, et de Soleil Vert, premier film à dénoncer le réchauffement climatique, font de lui une icône de la contre-culture SF.
That gave him a different angle, gave him a more modern cause to his movie life.
Après le sursaut de la science-fiction, Heston enchaîne avec la nouvelle mode des années 70. Les films catastrophes, mais dont le public va vite se lasser. Au début des années 80, à bientôt 60 ans, les scénarios ne s'amoncellent plus sur son bureau. Son nouvel attaché de presse, Michael Levine, a peut-être la solution.
I said, Mr. Heston, I can't make you any more famous, but I can make you more relevant. And I said, Mr. Heston, I've gotten you to host Saturday Night Live. And he paused on the phone and he said, what's Saturday Night Live? I said, well, Mr. Heston, it's a show that they do in New York live. And he said, do you think we should do it, Michael? I said, we should. It's a good show.
It's Saturday Night Live.
Son passage dans cette émission comique très célèbre montre un Heston moins père la morale, capable de se parodier. Aux yeux de l'Américain moyen, il se fait plus accessible. Baignure descend de son char et accepte même l'offre du roi des séries télé, Aaron Spelling, de jouer dans la suite de Dynasty, les Colby.
It was partly for money, partly for fun, but mostly because he wanted to work. He was an actor. That's what he did.
Background. Action.
I think he wanted to stay alive. He wanted to stay current. I think he just wanted to be involved in the industry. And yeah, he did television, which at that time was sort of cookie cutter.
Some of his hair had fallen out. He's wearing a bad toupee. And that's the thing that TV explodes. Nobody thought of him anymore as Moses, or Ben-Hur. They thought of him as Grandpa, Grandpa Heston.
Dans les années 1990, à près de 70 ans, sa carrière est désormais derrière lui. Mais le temps a fait d'Heston une légende du cinéma, une figure du passé dont une nouvelle génération de cinéastes se souvient avec nostalgie.
The people in the industry who revered him when they were young, when they were kids, when they were growing up, brought him back.
C'est le cas en 1998, lorsque James Cameron lui confie un nouveau petit rôle au cinéma, dans True Lies. Mais ce n'est pas lui la star des tapis rouges. C'est un autre républicain, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
This small part is offered you in a very flattering way, and we'll pay you properly and all that stuff. Would you mind playing this cameo part? And you normally do it because you want to do some acting. Chuck was like quite a lot of us. There wasn't any question in his mind about being an actor. There was no alternative.
Dans la foulée, le jeune réalisateur, Larry Gutterman, propose à Heston de poser sa voix de stentor sur son film d'animation Comme chien et chat. Et à sa grande surprise, Chuck accepte.
We brought him artwork. We showed him storyboards of the sequence. He's a professional, and he takes no offense at the direction. It was a pleasure to be able to give him direction, give Charlton Heston, the guy who was my childhood idol in Planet of the Apes, direction about how to do a line, and have him do it.
I couldn't bear the thought of never acting again. Pretending to be other people may seem like a trivial occupation for a grown man, but it has fascinated me all my life.
Chuck veut jouer, encore et toujours. Mais son dernier grand rôle ne viendra pas du cinéma.
Every hour of life has its own moment of truth. And who better to call it to our attention than the man who parted the Red Sea? Chuck Heston.
Depuis l'élection en 1981 de Ronald Reagan, dont il a soutenu la campagne, Chuck s'est engagé pleinement au sein des Républicains. Lors d'une émission animée par Frank Sinatra, en l'honneur du président réélu, les deux conservateurs ne cachent pas leur amitié.
Party for the president and the first lady on a first-name basis. It's a great idea, just like the old days. We watch him laugh, we see Nancy's foot tap to the music. But we know, sir, you are us. To the world, you are America. And as you lead us into the uncertain, beleaguered future, let me say for all of us, Mr. President, in the words of a song you'll remember, God shed his grace on thee.
And I can tell you that I was in his home office many, many, many times in which I would hear the phone ring and I would hear, Mr. Heston, the president's on the phone for you.
Reagan worked his Hollywood connections very thoroughly when he was a president, and he got Charlton Heston to help out on cultural issues.
Reagan va plus loin. Il le nomme président d'un groupe de travail lié à la culture. Un émissaire envoyé à l'étranger pour représenter la Maison-Blanche, comme au Festival de Deauville.
Maintenant, lorsque vous vous exprimez, ce n'est pas simplement un comédien qui s'exprime, c'est aussi presque un homme politique.
I'll do my best as an ambassador without portfolio. It's important to function in the public sector. Trips like the recent trip I took to the UNESCO conference on world culture in Mexico City for the White House.
Durant les années Reagan, Heston ne se contente pas des affaires culturelles. Ses convictions sont devenues radicales, ultra-conservateurs, anti-avortement et pro-armes. Ses prises de position politiques controversées séduisent les républicains qui pensent à lui pour le mandat ultime.
The Republicans looked at Heston as a possible successor to Reagan, perfect to be governor and then president. So they approached him.
L'histoire se répète. Après les démocrates dans les années 60, Heston décline l'offre des républicains. Épris de liberté, il ne veut pas être un simple élu à la botte d'un parti. À l'image de ses rôles de leaders inspirants, il veut dicter sa propre loi.
I'm fortunate in, as an American citizen, having the right to speak out on public issues, and I've led a very fortunate life. And if I can make useful contributions, that's a consummation devoutly to be wished.
Profondément attaché aux États-Unis, Heston souhaite sincèrement s'impliquer dans la vie de son pays. Mais l'acteur vieillissant est en décalage avec la société des années 90, frappé par le chômage et les discriminations raciales. Le Moïse de l'Amérique assiste sans comprendre aux émeutes qui secouent Los Angeles, sa ville, au printemps 92.
Madame, monsieur, bonsoir. Au moins 9 morts et plus de 170 blessés au cours de la plus violente émeute que Los Angeles ait connue depuis 30 ans. Les troubles ont éclaté à la suite de l'acquittement de 4 policiers blancs jugés pour avoir passé à tabac un automobiliste noir.
Le martyr de cet automobiliste, Rodney King, est devenu le symbole des violences policières envers les Afro-Américains. Face à ces injustices, le chanteur Ice-T se fait le porte-voix de ses victimes, avec un hymne anti-police, Cop Killer, un titre contre lequel Heston va immédiatement partir en guerre.
Heston gets involved because he sees it as an assault on law and order. Heston has now become Mr. American Law and Order. And after all, isn't Moses the lawmaker, the one who tells us we have to obey the Torah, we have to obey the 10 Commandments?
This group from South Los Angeles, heavily minority black area, released an album that they wanted to call Cop Killer. It had one song on there in particular that attracted attention, and the lyrics were very, very specific about killing police officers over and over again.
Déterminé à faire entendre sa voix, Heston va jusqu'à affronter Time Warner, qui distribue l'album. 3 mois après les émeutes de Los Angeles, il se rend à l'Assemblée générale des actionnaires de la Major.
Now, I owned a couple of hundred shares of Time Warner stock at the time, so I decided to attend. Against the advice of my family, I asked for the floor. I simply read the full lyrics. I got my 12-gauge sawed off. I got my headlights turned off. I'm about to bust some shots off. I'm about to dust some cops off. Let's just say I left the room in an echoing silence. A few weeks later, Time Warner terminated Ice-T's contract.
À l'image de ses rôles, Charlton a dégainé pour faire régner sa propre justice. Mais le tonton flingueur, dont les excès faisaient le charme pour certains, va définitivement ternir son étoile sur Walk of Fame. En s'engageant à la fin des années 90 au sein de la NRA, le puissant lobby américain soutenant le port d'armes, Heston franchit la ligne rouge.
Once he became the spokesman for the National Rifle Association, he was part of a very polarizing pro-gun movement.
Pour le lobby, la star est une belle prise. Loin des scandales de Hollywood, homme d'une seule femme depuis toujours, le républicain Heston est un messie qui transmet la bonne parole. Il prend même la présidence de l'association en 98, à 75 ans.
He gives us a big megaphone. We feel we've been unfairly demonized in the national press, and now Moses is here to help set the record straight.
Heston fait corps avec l'Amérique profonde et sa défense de la liberté. La première, celle de posséder une arme, malgré les fusillades dramatiques qui se multiplient.
C'est l'heure du déjeuner dans ce lycée de Littleton. 2 jeunes armés de fusils automatiques pénètrent dans la cafétéria et ouvrent le feu au hasard sur les lycéens. Les meurtriers sillonnent l'établissement pour abattre d'autres élèves.
La tuerie de Columbine, en avril 1999, fait 15 morts et laisse une Amérique sous le choc. Malgré l'émotion, le porte-flingue de la NRA campe sur ses positions. Il refuse tout contrôle supplémentaire des armes à feu.
What we need to do is address the problem of disturbed, indeed mentally deranged children. That something has to be done about that. If we're living in a society where people, it has something to do with the moral fabric of the country.
This was, from my point of view, the final insult to the liberalism that he represented back in the 1960s, and basically made him out to be a figure that we couldn't even take seriously anymore as anything.
Après le drame de Columbine, Heston tombe de son piédestal. Il a perdu l'essentiel de son public. Malgré une carrière d'une longévité exceptionnelle de plus de 60 ans. Pour l'applaudir, il ne lui reste désormais que les membres de la NRA.
It became his career. Yes, he believed in the freedom to have a gun, but it was deeper than that. When Heston got before this crowd, it reminded him of performing in front of live audiences, and he loved it.
I want to say those fighting words for everyone within the sound of my voice, to hear and to heed. From my cold, dead hands.
When he held that rifle up that famous day, it was not an original or spontaneous thought, because Heston was not a spontaneous guy. He was not he was an actor who prepared. And of course, it had the opposite effect. It all but destroyed any chance of his ever regaining a popularity.
Lorsque Charlton s'éteint en 2008, la jeunesse a oublié la légende Heston. Son dernier grand rôle, celui de président de la NRA, a éclipsé tous les autres. En voulant défendre envers et contre tous sa vision ultra-conservatrice de l'Amérique, le comédien s'est brûlé les ailes. Une étoile déchue qui n'a jamais vraiment saisi comment il avait atteint le firmament.
What makes an actor a star is not his acting ability in film. It is a chemical or kinetic capacity which no one has ever been able to separate out any more than they can the cancer-producing elements in tobacco. But it's there. I've forgotten what the question was. Did I answer it?